President Trump announced that the United States seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela, escalating U.S. pressure on President Nicolas Maduro's regime.
This is a pretty significant development. The oil tanker and other aspects of the oil industry in Venezuela have been under sanction for some time. But actually, the seizure of an oil tanker on the high seas is virtually without precedent and is likely to raise the price of oil and may well raise the price of gas at the pump. But there are much more important issues to draw out of this. First of all, I'm not a lawyer, and I've said that many times. This action does seem to have more legal justification than the bombing of alleged drug smuggling boats, the killing of the sailors, the occupants of the boat, without due process, without authorization from Congress. This act does seem to have been done in pursuit of a judge-issued warrant for a sanctioned oil tanker. Now, Trump has said, well, I think we'll keep the oil. Not clear whether they actually have a right to confiscate the oil as opposed to intercepting the ship. But there are many implications that we need to tease out. Oil, right, Sam?
Oil.
Clearly, oil is a big part of what Trump is trying to do in Venezuela. Venezuela has the world's largest reserves of oil, larger even than Saudi Arabia. Huge prize for Donald Trump, for his business interests, conceivably, and clearly for the business interests of his donors and rich friends. Always, when it deals with what Trump is doing, follow the money. Now, the biggest implication of this,
Tell me,
is this part of an effort for a militarily compelled regime change in Venezuela.
Right.
You know, as one Democrat said, who knows, what goes on in the mind of Trump. He changes his mind every few minutes. He talks in word salads that are almost impossible to interpret. But certainly he has hinted at his goal of regime change in Venezuela, including compelling that through attacks on the territory of Venezuela, not just on boats on the high seas. He's also amassed a major naval armada near Venezuela, along with, I think, about 15,000 U.S. troops as well. Who knows what he's doing? But a couple of very important points to make here.
Make them.
Number one, this is in direct contradiction. Imagine that, to what Trump promised in the campaign.
No.
What did he promise about foreign military ventures and attempts at regime change?
They're a thing of the past.
Thing of the past. Those are the great mistakes made by Democrats. And in my America First agenda, we are going to eliminate those Democratic mistakes of the past. And here he is doing something equally, or in many ways, much more aggressive than anything that was done in the previous Biden administration, directly contradicting his promises and supposedly the America First agenda that he stands for. That's why some true American firsters, like Senator Rand Paul, are very upset about what Trump is doing, and do believe that this is a violation of what the MAGA movement is supposed to stand for. And a lot of leaders and followers of the MAGA movement, Sam, are very upset with Trump because they believe he is obsessed with these foreign ventures and foreign policy initiatives at the expense of dealing with the needs of the American people at home. The need for affordable health care, for a clean environment, for affordable prices, for abundant jobs. All of this seems to be going by the boards as Trump seems to be bidding for foreign conquest, or as we know, desperately seeking the Nobel Peace Prize. Instead, he got this phonied up FIFA Peace Prize. And what Peace Prize didn't he get? The Lichtman Live Peace Prize. Not going to Donald Trump.
Nope.
So a lot of MAGAs are really upset by what they see as a misguided focus of Donald Trump in his second term and this obsession with doing business in foreign lands, making profits, and trying to get the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, here is some critical historical perspective.
Nice.
If, in fact, as he's certainly indicated, although you never know with Trump, he is pressing for regime change in Venezuela. And what has been the history of American-engineered regime change in Latin America?
Didn't go well.
An absolute disaster. A litany of disasters. And I'm not going to go through all the examples. There are at least, 8 to 10 really strong examples. I'll just give you a few of them to put some historical perspective on the folly of compelled regime change in Venezuela. Go back to the early 20th century, the era of dollar diplomacy, the era of missionary diplomacy, when the United States actively intervened in foreign nations, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. I'm going to limit my examples to the Western Hemisphere. The United States in the early 20th century literally took over the government of Haiti after overthrowing its indigenous government. It was a disaster for the people of Haiti. It was incredibly repressive. They had, forced work arrangements that some say killed tens of thousands of Haitians. It was, very beneficial for the Americans, but a disaster for the people of Haiti as this went on for a number of years. Fast forward to 1954, Guatemala, when an American-arranged coup overturned the left-wing government of Jacobo Arbenz. The result was the installation of a repressive dictator, Castillo Armas, who got overthrown, but it led to 36 years of repressive dictatorial governments that ravaged Argentina and that provoked a 36-year civil war, 36 years of civil war, as people's armies sought to oppose these regressive dictators that came in as a result of the American-engineered regime change in Guatemala. This resulted, during this horrible era of repression, in what became known as the genocide, and that word is not used lightly here, of the indigenous Mayan civilians, not combatants. Overall, during this horrible civil war resulting from American-engineered regime change, there was some 200,000 deaths in a small, lightly populated country, most of them Mayan civilians. This American-engineered regime change was such a disaster that in 1999, President Bill Clinton did something extraordinary. You know what he did, Sam?
No.
He apologized for American intervention in Guatemala. He said, quote, "For the United States, it is important that I state clearly that support for military forces and intelligence units which engaged in violence and widespread repression was wrong and the United States must not repeat that mistake in Guatemala. We must, and we will instead, continue to support the peace and reconciliation process in Guatemala. Very rare for an American president to apologize for a major foreign policy action, although this one was so disastrous that there could be no excuse for it. During the Nixon administration, America participated in the overthrow of another leftist government in the nation of Chile. And you know who they installed in his place?
Pinochet.
Pinochet, one of the most brutal, ruthless of dictators. Under the Pinochet regime, more than 3,000 residents of Chile were murdered or simply disappeared, never to be heard from again, as part of the repression of General Pinochet to exercise complete control over his people. And in addition, tens of thousands were imprisoned and subject to the most brutal kind of torture. Pinochet's regime is kind of a poster child for a horrible, repressive, murderous regime. And once again, it was the counterproductive, disastrous result of an American engineered regime change in Latin America. Final example that I will turn to is an attempt at regime change that failed, that in fact came to a disastrous end. You know what I'm talking about, Sam?
No.
The Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961.
I thought you were going chronologically. That's why
I was, but I took this one out because it's different.
Okay.
It's a failed attempt at regime change.
Right.
Another disaster. America sponsored in 1961, under the Kennedy administration, one of his first significant acts, a exile invasion of Cuba. It's called the Bay of Pigs fiasco because the invasion force landed on the Bay of Pigs. And the misguided notion was that they would spark a regime change by sparking a revolt against the communist government of Fidel Castro. Did that work, Sam?
No.
No. The ragtag exile invading force sent by the U.S., they were either captured, a number of them were killed, and it actually strengthened the Castro regime. And to this day, of course, Castro and his successor have maintained tight communist control over Cuba, in part as a result of the folly of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Even a subsequent CIA evaluation said this attempt at regime change was so fundamentally flawed in concept, in the idea of forcing a regime change, and in execution, that it never had any chance to succeed. Why did Kennedy do this? I searched the archives and found the answer.
What?
Yes, he was convinced that Castro was so tightening his control over Cuba that this was the last chance to dislodge him. The plan was already set under the Eisenhower administration. It wasn't Kennedy's plan, but he foolishly listened to these advisors and implemented it. He learned from that, Sam, that don't trust these so-called experts in the military and in covert operations. Another counterproductive result of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion was it was one of the factors leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis, to empower the Soviet Union under Premier Nikita Khrushchev to install offensive missiles in Cuba, leading to the most dangerous episode of the Cold War. But Kennedy learned something from the failed attempt for regime change in Cuba. He didn't listen to the experts, didn't listen to the generals. You know what they wanted to do? What do you think?
Bomb.
Bomb and invade. And you know what? They didn't know that the Russians had installed tactical nuclear weapons, battlefield nuclear weapons. If Kennedy had listened to the generals and there had been an invasion, and very likely the Russians would have used those tactical nuclear weapons, and it could have started World War III. Instead, Kennedy didn't listen, developed his own idea for a blockade or quarantine, much less extreme than bombing and invasion, and was able to defuse the crisis. So history has warnings loud and clear that attempts at regime change in Latin America have, for the most part, sparked a litany of failures, and we only do so at our extreme peril.
Let me ask you a question about Maduro and regime change. Obviously, it almost never works, right?
Almost never.
We've got this figure, Nicolas Maduro, right? Ruthless dictator, rigs elections, has destroyed the entire country. You've got a lot of Venezuelans who live in America who really want regime change. They want Maduro out. You've got Machado, who's the opposition leader in Venezuela. She actually escaped and recently won the Nobel Peace Prize, the peace prize that Trump wanted. She's also heavily calling for regime change in Venezuela. So how do you balance the two? How do you try to put somebody, a terrible person like Maduro, in check without falling into this pitfall of regime change?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. There are terrible dictators all over the world.
Sure, of course.
And Maduro is not the worst.
Sure, but it's not about who's the worst.
There are much worse dictators. And even when we've overthrown horrible dictators, I'll give you the example in Libya, right? Gaddafi. I'll give you the example in Iraq. Saddam Hussein. Has it worked? Have these been stable, democratic countries that respect human rights? No.
No.
They've been failed countries as a result of that. So there's got to be another way, a diplomatic way, a way of supporting the opposition to Maduro within Venezuela without attempting an American-engineered coup or military intervention.
Yeah. I guess that's the dream scenario, but that also seems sort of hard to do, especially with like authoritarian leaders like Maduro. It's like,
yeah, I mean,
he's not going to just
overturn Putin, Xi, Orban.
No, I'm not saying, I'm not defending
the leaders of Cuba.
I'm not defending regime change. I'm just wondering if there is a middle ground, if there's another solution. And yes, diplomatic solutions would be great if possible, but the if possible is a major, well,
they're not being used.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
You have this ham-handed, militaristic approach that Trump has taken, as opposed to trying to deal with the situation in Venezuela through diplomatic means.
But come on, let's be realistic. Maduro's not just going to... We're not just going to come to Maduro through diplomatic means, and he's not just going to be like, oh, you know what? Sure. You know what? I'm stepping down. Here you go. That's not going to happen.
No, of course not. But there's got to be enough pressure on him. Let's look what, it was another negative outcome. But popular movements have overturned even stronger dictators than Maduro. I'll give you the example of the Shah of Iran, one of the most powerful strongman rulers in the world, had this incredible secret police force keeping all his opposition in control. And idealists, it might not be our ideals, Islamist idealists did succeed in overturning the government of the Shah of Iran. So it can be done. We saw it in the Philippines with the overturning of dictatorship in the Philippines. It can happen.
But the Shah was also installed by the U.S. government.
I understand that.
Okay.
But my point was, he was a very powerful strongman dictator who they managed to overturn.
Yeah, but
it can happen.
Yeah, but they overturned the Shah, but things didn't turn out very well for Iran after the Shah.
Understood. But my only point there was not that I believe in the Islamic Republic, but that was a grassroots, up from the bottom movement that did overturn a strongman dictator. My only point was not to defend the aftermath, but simply to say it is possible that grassroots movements can overturn dictatorial governments. And we've seen that in other examples in parts of Latin America. Brazil, for example, very recently, getting rid of Bolsonaro. Thanks for watching our video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a member today.